Welcome, dear friends. In this part, we'll see the metaphysical school of poetry and restoration period and the new classical age or the age of prose or reason. Let's begin with the metaphysical school of poetry. The metaphysical school of poetry signifies a very significant development in the history of English literature. This movement carries a special name in the history. John Donne wrote two kinds of poems, the secular love poems and the religious poems, that is known as holy sonnets. In the history of English literature, Dr. Johnson, the well-known English writer and the critic, termed the writing of the Donne and other poets who wrote in the fashion of the Donne as metaphysical poetry. Meta means beyond, physics means physical element. The word metaphysical signifies the meaning. Metaphysical poets used the literary devices known as a conceit, that is one type of the simile. They also compares the two things, whether they may be animate or inanimate one. Let me give a very simple definition given by the Dr. Samuel Johnson. Apparently, dissimilar elements violently yoked together. That was the definition of the conceit given by the famous critic, that is Dr. Samuel Johnson. It is a combination of the two dissimilar or heterogeneous ideas. For example, in John Donne's poem Valediction Forbidding Mourning in 1633, uses a famous conceit of a pair of compass for the two lovers. The one end of a compass remains firm on the ground and the other revolves around it. The two ends may go away from each other, but they are united at the top end. So this is the simile, is known as a conceit, which is used by the John Donne. A lover may physically go away from the beloved, but spiritually they are united at the top together. Donne's other poem, The Flea, in 1633, uses the analogy of the flea biting to establish the relation of the two lovers. So these are the elements which are beyond our, I would say, the perceptions. And there are some of the features of the metaphysical school of poetry. In that, far-fetched images are used, like in one of the poems written by John Donne, he uses the simile, go and catch the falling star. It's not possible for us to catch the falling star, but that is used there. So that is called that feature is known as the far-fetched imageries. The far-fetched imageries are used there. Then abrupt and colloquial opening is there, another feature. In one of the poem, Canonization, the starting line or the beginning line of that poem is hold your tongue and let me love. So that was the abrupt and colloquial opening. Suddenly, the reader feels that there is an attack on us. Without any introduction, so the emotion begins like a burst. The other noble poets from this school of poetry are George Herbert, Richard Crasher, Henry Vaughan, and Andrew Marvell. Andrew Marvell is very famous for his poem that is To His Coy Mistress in 1681. Let's move towards another significant poet of the 17th century, that is John Milton. John Milton is considered as a child of the Renaissance and is one of the most influential poet in English. To his credit, there is a great epic that is Paradise Lost in 1667. The theme of the poem is justification of the ways of the God to the man. Actually, the line which is that they vindicate the ways of God to the man. It is the verse narration of the biblical story of the disobedience. That was the first disobedience of the human being. That human being is created by the God Almighty. And the fall of the Adam and Eve and their expulsion from the paradise. That is the theme of that great epic. The two other notable works by Milton are Pastoral Elegy Lycidas in 1638, a tragedy in verse by Samson Agonist in 1671, and a sonnet on his blindness that is prescribed for your syllabus in 1673. Also, another significant poem written by the same author, same poet, that is Paradise Regained in 1670. From that point, we will move to the Restoration period of the history of English literature. The prominent poet from the Restoration period, and that Restoration period is spanned between 1660 to 1700. The eminent poet is John Dryden, though he is known as a critic and playwright. His poems are equally important. His significant poems are allegories, satires, and mock heroic epics like Maclecknoe in 1682 and Absalom and Achitophel in 1681. His other poems includes Annus Mirabilis in 1667, Religio Leci 1682, The Hind and the Panther in 1687, Annie Killigrew 1686, and the Alexander's Feast in 1697. So these are the major contributions by this great poet. Let's move to the last section of this part of the presentation, of the discussion, is 18th century. And 18th century is known as the age of prose, reason, and good sense. Satire and novel are the main genres of this age. Alexander Pope is a towering literary figure of the first half of the 18th century. The writers of this age, like Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Joseph Addison, and Steele, gave importance to the study of the classical Greek writers and wish to follow them in true spirit in writing. Due to their insistence on following the classical writers, the 18th century writers are known as neoclassical writers. The age is known as the neoclassical period. Also, Alexander Pope carried the critical and the satirical spirit of the age in his poetry. His philosophical, critical work like Essay on Criticism, Essay on Man, these are the major works in the form of poems written in heroic couplets, a standard classical literary form at that point of time. Pope's famously known for his mock epic, A Rape of the Lock, which is a mock epic written in 1717, follows the convention of the classical epic, but it is a satire also. To criticize the social manners and customs of his time, Pope takes a trivial subject matter, an aristocratic young man cutting a lock of a lady, and present it in the grand epic style. Miss Arabella Fermor. That is actually an incident which had happened at that point of time. Peter Carey cut the lock of the Miss Arabella Fermor, and in order to appease between the two families, the product is the poem. Pope's other satire on the mock epic style that applies a grand style of presentation through a comic and trivial subject is a Dug's Year. The word dunce refers to a dull, unwittingly foolish person. In his satire, Pope criticizes the unworthy poets and publishers of his times. It was the last decades of the 18th century. We find a change in the production and the reception of the literature. The second half of the 18th century witnessed the three great revolutions that brought a major shift in the course of the history of mankind. These three revolutions are the American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, and the Industrial Revolution which had happened in the England. The impact of these three events, which are very significant, is seen in the literature of this period also. The American Revolution overthrew the British rule on the American colony and declares independence. However, the major change it brought to human beings is the freedom of the individual. The American Revolution marked the end of the monarchy and autocracy and established the rule of democracy. The French Revolution announced the famous slogan "Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity" that was the call. It also overthrew the monarchy. The philosophers who were the source of the inspiration for these revolutions were Rousseau and Thomas Paine. Rousseau in his The Social Contract in 1762 and Thomas Paine in his Common Sense in 1776 emphasized the need of the freedom of the soul, freedom of the individual, and denounced any kind of authority and agency that restricts and denies the due rights of the individual. Rousseau stated that man is born free and all human beings are equal. He stressed the need to go back to the nature. The Industrial Revolution changed the agrarian ways of human life. It introduced the machinery, industries, and helped to resolve a number of issues related to the industrialization and to an urbanization like the migration of the workers to the cities. The declining scale of the agricultural, the problem of the workers, the child labor, and exploitation. All these issues are reflected in the literature of this period known as Romantic or Romantic literature. That is our topic of next discussion. So with this I conclude. Thank you.